Hi, everyone. It is a true delight this morning, or I believe it's afternoon where you are, to be talking with comics creator, may I say legend, comics legend. Is that acceptable?
Oh, fine by me.
Simon Furman. Simon, thank you so much for jumping in and joining, and thank you also for the lovely shelf space that you have there and the art. I always appreciate the space that authors find themselves in and creators find themselves in. So, thank you for jumping in.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And yes, you're in my little cubby hole office, but it's great. I'm sort of covered around by books and original art, so you can't ask for much more.
Yeah, truly, truly. Looks like there's a Transformers calendar happening there, and of course, Transformers is one of those titles. You've worked on a lot of Transformers in comics, and also some, I believe, in television.
Yeah, sure. And these days games, I'm
Hmm.
working on a lot of Transformers games. But yeah, we're coming up 40 years of Transformers and pretty much 40 years since I've been involved. So yeah, it's been great. It's been sort of the cornerstone, I guess, of my whole comics career.
Yeah, yeah. Now I'll mention you've worked on a lot of titles, a lot of titles. So I'll mention just a few more as well that I've enjoyed over the years. You've worked on Doctor Who, Death's Head, Captain Planet, of all things, Captain
Yeah.
Planet. Alpha Flight, big fan of Alpha Flight. What If, Astro Robots, Ronin, RoboCop, lots of worlds, lots of creative worlds.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very lucky to work on, I mean, I was always a big Marvel fan growing up, and, to work for first Marvel UK and then Marvel US was a big tick in my sort of bucket list. And yeah, since then I've just worked on some fantastic properties. RoboCop, I did some Terminator work.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
lovely to play around in these, the Doctor Who as well. I grew up with Doctor Who, so and currently I'm working on some sort of revamps of old British superheroes. So,
Love
that's
it.
great. It's almost come full circle from the comics I used to read to the stuff I'm working on, which is just great.
Wonderful, wonderful. You seem to have a really nice thread of science fiction. Was that I'm an English teacher, so I'm always curious about the reading life and connections to creativity. Was science fiction that grabbed you as a young reader?
Yeah, I think it was more as a young viewer that
Hmm. Hmm.
I found with science fiction. My taste in books tends to veer towards crime and private eye and noir and that kind of genre. I mean, not exclusively by any means. And I've read many, many science fiction books, but I think it was more science fiction movies that, were the influential bit of it. I mean, I grew up in the sort of 60s/70s. And the 70s was a fantastic era for science fiction movies, TV.
Hmm.
So, I think, I was, if I was inspired by anything, it was probably the movies over the fiction.
Yeah, yeah. Now, as a storyteller, what was it that connected you and made you go, "Oh, this is what I want to do. I want to tell stories, and particularly in comics and visuals."
I mean, I was a voracious reader as a kid. So, you know, I read books, I read comics, but, something about comics, the whole form of it really appealed to me. I knew that right from the start that, I was just interested in the that synthesis of story and art. It
Hmm.
just, really brought it alive for me. And, I was brought up on British comics initially. And then I discovered Marvel Comics through some of the reprint titles we would get here.
Hmm.
And I think it was sort of the way Stanley, involved you, the reader, into the whole world he was creating and the interconnected world that I think really inspired me and still inspires me to, if I'm telling a story, that idea of having bubbling subplots and hopefully some challenging wordage in there. Stanley's stuff and all those Marvel writers, sometimes back in good old pre-internet days you would have to reach for the dictionary to know what a particular word was. and I just found the whole sort of Marvel way of pulling you into the universe, the biggest draw of comics for me. So, especially things like Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, the cosmic stuff in Thor and Fantastic Four. I think, you can see it how it sort of drips down into my own writing when I get on Transformers, and I love those kind of big space opera type stories and huge, universe threatening creations like Galactus. So yeah, I was always really, I love the grandiosity of the language, the visuals, Kirby,
Hmm.
and I think the medium itself just pulled me in. And though I probably had a few years where I thought I'm too old for this and got rid of my comics and whatever else, it really didn't take much to get me back into it again.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah. And, you have certainly a history with the medium, and I'm curious about some of those milestones that have stood out to you in particular. I know on the reader side, everyone has their favorites, but any sort of comfort spots or moments of really just positive memories from your career so far?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Transformers was, apart from a little bit of work before, Transformers was almost my first script work. I worked on a little British horror, creepy stories for kids
Mm-hmm.
called Scream, and that was where I sort of cut my script writing teeth. And then, but really, Transformers was my first experience of longer form comic storytelling, where you were telling big epic storylines and breaking them down into smaller storylines. So, and we worked in little 11-page chunks. We were a weekly when the UK strip came out, it was weekly and 11 pages. And you learnt to condense and really sort of make sure that you put lots of hooks into each 11 pages to make the reader pick up the next issue and the next issue. So I think it was a really good way of learning how to engage with the readers and to make them want to come back for more. So we always kept the stories on a small scale within a much larger framework, and that set me up well for sort of future work for Marvel US. And obviously getting my first job for Marvel US was a big career, milestone, I suppose.
Hmm.
And that happened again via Transformers, because Bob Budiansky, who was writing the Marvel comic at the time, he decided he was coming off it. They needed a writer to just pick up where he left off, and we were already in touch through, the two Marvels. So it was very easy, and but for me a big deal to sort of get into the hallowed halls of Marvel US, and from there to pick up work on What If and She-Hulk and Alpha Flight and RoboCop, and just, be in that place I'd always wanted to be in. So I think that transition, but more latterly, I think, the reinvention of Transformers in the early 2000s again kind of kick-started the next bit of my career as well. So, it's just generally been there to sort of propel me into the next bit of whatever storytelling I'm doing.
Yeah, yeah. Curious about what it was like to go from writing and creating in comics to then going to the world of television as well.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, similar in some ways, very different in others. I was lucky enough to get to meet the script editors on the Beast Wars TV series, and we got talking about my doing a kind of guest shot on the show, with a very Generation One themed episode. But in the end, that turned out to be the last episode of Beast Wars that I wrote. And which was great, but also a little disappointing, because I thought, well, that what a shame, the show's coming to an end and I've just got my first screen credit. But thankfully, Bob Forward, who was one of the script editors, took me forward onto other projects he was working on. So I ended up working on a thing called the Roswell Conspiracies, Alien
Mhm,
Myths and Legends,
mhm,
and then X-Men Evolution and a CGI Dan Dare series. So there was plenty of really good opportunity that came out of that.
Absolutely. And so I think I only have one more official question, and that is current creative works, the things that have your creative attention, as well as places where people can go to learn about your work. I know that you collaborate with Andrew Wildman from time to time, so curious about that as well.
Sure, yeah. I mean, Andrew and I have worked together in the past on some creator-owned projects. And right now I'm trying to do more on the kind of creator-owned self-publishing side. So
Hmm.
I have a thing with Jeff Senior, one of the Transformers artists, and also, Marvel artists, and we created a series called To the Death, which is available in sort of collected volume form. And also I wrote recently that came out via Amazon, a one-shot graphic novel called 5 Points, which is again going back to that first love I mentioned, which was crime noir,
Love it.
slightly sort of creepy supernatural. So that was something that was a real labor of love for me, and I got to work with an artist called Martin Stiff, who had done a previous graphic novel called Tiny Acts of Violence, and I really liked his sort of moody and sort of evocative artwork. And so it really fitted the idea and the mood of the piece we were doing. So it's nice. I've got the creator owned strand. I'm working on a new mech series called Astrobots, which we've had one 5 issue series out from Whatnot,
Hmm.
and we've got the second series coming next year. That's all pretty much, large part of that is drawn and ready. So, and then we're working on a potential third series at the moment. So, that
Wonderful.
that has a nice sort of momentum about it. And very nicely, it's allowed me to work with the creators of this toy line
Hmm.
and develop the whole world, much as Bob Budiansky and some of the other Marvel creatives did with Transformers. We're doing from the ground up with Astrobots, which is really nice. And it's a little more sort of, I suppose, mature themed,
Hmm.
hopefully thoughtful sci-fi rather than just sort of giant robots hitting each other. I think it's definitely aiming at there's a lot of political subtext to the series. So we're really pleased to be working on that. And a lot of my other work is now in computer games. I've worked on and am working on various Transformers games, in different fields, VR, first person shooter, all sorts. And and Earth Wars is the main one that's out at the moment. And recently I worked on Earthspark Expedition, a game based on the new animated series. So yeah, lots going on, and some nice new games work that non-Transformers is coming out of that. So yeah, it's a nice balanced workload at the moment. And if you're interested in seeing what's going on, I'm on Facebook and X and Instagram. You can find me quite easily.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Simon, I appreciate your time. I appreciate the conversation and definitely appreciate your work both from the past and continuing. So thank you so much for jumping in and joining.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.